Hello again. Well, now we're starting week 4, and this is the instructor's presentation. To keep our continuity, I want to go back and just recap on week 3. In week 3, you started to look at techniques for documentation reviews, documentation of the project. You were looking at analogy comparisons, looking for analogies between the projects and the elements of the project and past history, and then looked at the project plan and evaluated that, looked at the WBS and the network and the schedules and the communications plans and the change management plans and the all of the requirements and all the requirements documents. Also, case study number 1 was released, and you're working on that now, and I hope you're enjoying yourselves. And now we're going to walk into week 4 and take a look at what we're going to do here. This week we're going to cover Pritchard's chapters 10, 11, and 12. The Delphi technique, brainstorming, and the Crawford slip method. In the Delphi technique, I think you'll find that really interesting, but it is time consuming. It's a sound structured practice for drawing out insights, and it affords the ability to facilitate an opportunity to review multiple perspectives as you're going forward. It's a very interesting technique. You don't really want to have everybody in the same room when you're doing it. Quite interesting, quite unique in the way it goes forward. Brainstorming, I'm sure you've done brainstorming and have a lot of history with brainstorming, but that really opens the door for free and candid discussion of risk, and does help give you an opportunity for thinking out of the box and coming up with new thoughts and new perspectives and to identify risk, looking at the risks and the analysis and understanding of the impact of the risk. So brainstorming is a real good capability as well. Then we come to Crawford slip method, and I don't know how many of you have ever heard of that before or used it, but it's an easy technique to apply. What happens is that there's a question issued or an issue. Everybody in the room gets to provide an answer to it, and you do that again and repeat it again and repeat it again. Formal Crawford slip method, usually you do that 10 times for each issue. However, in risk, you'll probably have worked through it after about 5 or so you probably won't go past 5 times on that. That'll give you some good information and ammunition to think about. Take a look at these techniques, and it adds 3 more tools to your toolkit on risk management, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you and getting your comments on exactly what your perception is of this week. Let's talk about risk, and let's talk about the project right now. Here's a diagram put together a number of years ago, and basically what it says is, okay, let's take this oval that's in the center, and let's make this the project, and this is the project world, the project team. And we put a boundary around it. And the boundary we put around it is really based on the scope of the project and the schedule and the budget. And fundamentally, this puts a wall around the project that we don't want to go outside of. We want to stay within. And it has all the requirements, the specifications, the budget, the schedule, all the resources, everything we need to do the project. In the project, we can then go through it, and by using these various techniques, define and analyze and detect the what we call known risks or known determinable risks. In other words, we can determine what these risks are and we can evaluate them, like a key person leaving, or the fact that we expect certain results out of some testing that goes on and we don't get those results, or we find out that we need some deliveries from a vendor, and what's the risk the vendor is going to be late, or consultants. A lot of the risks, these are the risks that occur and can develop within the project, and these are risks we need to identify and assess the impact of and figure out what we're going to do about them. That's not the whole story. That's just about the risks in the project. Okay? Because outside that boundary of the project is the rest of the world. And then the rest of the world can rain on our parade as well. First of all, we can have what we call known unknown risks. In other words, we know that we don't know about them. These can be things in areas, technology, it can be areas about customer environment, it can be whatever, but it's outside the project environment. And we know that we don't know about these risks, but we still have got to figure out how to take them into consideration and identify the areas that we're pretty ignorant on, that we don't really understand or know. Well, there's also another area out there, and that area is the unknown risks. And the unknown risks may sound a little bit foolish, but it is incredibly insightful. What we're basically saying is we don't know what we don't know. You know, you're pretty smart when you know what you do know. That's the known determinable risk. And we're pretty intelligent when we say we know what we don't know. I don't know anything about brain surgery. I don't know anything about what a librarian does. I don't know anything about what certain marine research requires. So I know that I don't know. But I don't know what I don't know that can create a risk event or a risk impact to the project. And we've got to figure out what we do about that, how we make some preservation, some resources. We have to make some allowances for the unknown risks. All right? So let's take a closer look now, and let's take a look at a risk. And I did mention this briefly last time, but I didn't have a slide. When we take a look at a risk, it's an event with a probability of occurrence. In other words, it's going to be greater than zero, but it's less than a sure thing. It's less than 100%, okay? So a risk has a probability between 0 and 100%. It's not 0 and it's not 100%. It's between it. It could be 0.5%. It could be 99.9%, but it can't be 0% and it can't be 100%. Okay? So applying the common sense test, if it is 0%, it's not a risk, it won't happen. If it's 100%, it will happen, okay? So in either case, we have nothing to worry about. We either forget it if it's 0, and if it's going to be 100%, then we fix it. We got to figure out what are we going to do about it, because it's there. It's 100%. It's going to happen. There's no question about that, okay? So the risk that we want to take care of in our risk mitigation, our risk management plans, and all we do lies between these two extremes, okay? And to get a handle on that, think about that we do practice this in our everyday life. Every day we do this. We just don't do it in a formal way. We just do it as something we learned as we grew up, and now we do it sort of subconsciously. But yes, we do practice this in everyday life, okay? What about when you're going to the shore or the beach or something like that, and you decide to put some sunblock on, or what sunblock are you going to, what number are you going to take? Sunscreen. What about deciding how fast you want to drive, or what the speed limit is, or do you care about the speed limit? How about those rolling stops at stop signs, okay? These are all the risks that we have, okay? And we're talking about those risks now, and now we want to say, okay, in a subjective way, how can we classify risk? And this chart gives us a sense of how to get our hands on that and how to look at it in a qualitative, not a quantitative, a qualitative way. And we have two axes here. One is the magnitude of the impact across the bottom, or the x-axis, and to the left at the origin, it's no impact to the project. All the way over to the right, it's a large impact, and we don't try to define that quantitatively. This is more qualitative. And then the y-axis, or the vertical axis, we talk about the probability of occurrence, the probability of loss. In other words, that's that between 0 and 100%. At the origin, it's a low probability. As we go up, it becomes a higher and higher probability. And then at the origin itself, we talk about the event. Okay, so let's say we have an event. If it's a low probability and very low impact, we consider it a low risk. And then if it has a very, very low probability, but the impact, if it occurs, is higher, we still might consider that a low risk. And if there's very, very little impact, but a high probability of occurrence, we still look at that as sort of like a low risk. And that's where these curves come from. And as the probability goes up and the magnitude of the impact goes up, then we move into from a low risk category to a moderate risk category to a high risk category. And as we get out there to the upper right, where we have a high probability and a large impact, or a significant impact, we consider that area to be really high risk. And so that's one way we can classify risk in a qualitative way. Okay, now I want to talk about risk type. In risk type, just looking at three different kinds. We're looking at a risk averter, risk neutral, risk seeker. Okay, a risk averter is one that if the impact the x-axis even starts to increase, the risk averter is very unhappy with it and wants to stay away from it. Okay, so it takes a lot before that risk averter is going to do something about it, or is going to let something happen. The risk averter will do anything to avert a risk. Risk neutral means that no matter what the impact is or how unfavorable it is, the risk averter, the risk neutral, just goes up on a diagonal line. Risk seeker means that feels very comfortable at risk, and no matter what the impact is, it's not going to upset them or make them unhappy very much. It's only when the risk impact gets up to some really big bucks does the aversion to risk or the unhappiness at risk increase. And so these are the three categories that we can think about. The point this slide makes is that the project manager must evaluate the project's risk tolerance. The project manager may be a real athletic person and go in for extreme sports and all that, which would be a risk seeker as far as I think. But the point is that the project manager must evaluate the project's risk tolerance, not the project manager's risk tolerance. The project is the one that's going to get impacted by a risk event. And we must evaluate the project's risk tolerance, not our own risk tolerances or the risk tolerance of anyone else. Taking a look at risk now, and let's just look at the difference between the risk to a business and the risk to the project. And if we look at a business organization and look at this hierarchical picture here, if we're talking about the business products and services, the portfolio, the business or whatever, up there we might have risk too to the business, to the portfolio, and that's a risk that's based, it's business management based. It's on our company. And some of the strategies about how we're going to do performance and measure performance, return on investment, constraint management. What do we do if we can't get enough supplies to make so many airplanes, or can't get enough supplies to make so many weapons or print books or whatever? The portfolio level, strategies level, and a business organization are all business-based type risks. But as we get down into the company to the programs where we're talking about integration management of projects, or down to the projects themselves where we have a specific statement of work that we need to implement and we need to execute, those two are project-based risk managements. And the risks to projects and programs fall into our area of responsibility and influence, and those are the risks we need to worry about. These other risks are risks that the executive level of management will worry about, and sometimes if our projects become big enough, we can influence those or impact those, and in those cases we have to work a lot closer with our executives and with upper management to make sure that we don't get anything into trouble. Looking for a minute now at the range of risk from certainty to uncertain. And if you go all the way to the left where it says certainty, we're talking about, yay, this is an issue. Or if we're talking about uncertainty and go in that direction, it might never happen. There's no level of probability or confidence, no clear response strategy. But to all the risks that might occur or have a probability of occurrence somewheres in the middle, these we have to consider. These are the ones we have got to concern ourselves with, and we can define the impacts. And then we need to qualitatively, like that slide a few slides ago, or quantitatively by numerical analysis of one kind or another, we have to evaluate what the impact and what the level of category of that risk is and what we're going to do about it. What is our response strategy? How are we going to handle that risk if we are going to have a risk trigger or that risk event occur? So the risk response strategy can be achieved. Okay, we're getting to know a little bit more about the personality of risk, or the dynamics of risk, the anatomy of risk. This particular chart talks to us more about the process of what we do about risk. We start up in the upper left corner up there. What we want to do up there is we say, okay, we're going to plan risk management. Okay, we're going to sit down and actually decide what our risk management strategy is. Our best practices, we talked about that before. We have maybe some certain processes throughout the company that we use in all our projects. But we set up our risk management, and then we use one of those techniques like the three we're talking about today, this week, or those that we talked about last week. And we need to identify the risks. We need to identify the risks, and all that means is create a list. Create a list of the risks. Often, as we're going through the planning process in a project, we come up with thoughts or ideas or concerns or issues or things like that. My recommendation and my standard practice is that anything like that at all immediately gets added to the risk list. We can't be tracking 300, 500 risks or anything like that, but we certainly can start out with we start out with a list of several hundred risks, and we start to neck those down and start looking at which ones are the ones that can give us the most grief, and we start worrying about which ones we're going to look out for and which ones we may just track. Once we've identified the risks, okay, that's when we go to performing our analyses, either a qualitative risk analysis, quantitative risk analysis, or both. And once we have that analysis, that means we have the probability of occurrence and we have evaluated the impact of that risk, the impact to the project if that risk event is to occur. Based on having this information, and we need this information, then we can plan our risk responses. We can decide how we're going to deal with these probable events that can occur to our project. And once we have planned our risk responses and we've set that in motion, whether it's a mitigation action or avoidance action, and we'll talk more about those later in another week, okay? Once we have got all those established, then we set up a process of monitoring and controlling the risks. And what that means primarily is that we set up a process where we are going to periodically, on a reasonable basis, every couple of weeks, every month, it depends on the sensitivity of the project to risk, and it depends on how long the project is, how often we might actually sit down and take a look at all these risk responses and analyze them and see which ones may have gone away, which ones may have gotten worse, which ones may have gotten better, and identify any new risks or anything of that nature. And from that point of view, then we will continue that process and go back and continually work through this cycle of processes for all of our risks. So that's going to cover it for this week. The following week, in week 5, we're going to look at SWOT analysis. That's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, okay, and threats. And then we're going to look at checklists, and we're going to look at a risk breakdown structure. And also, your first case study will be due on the 23rd of July. And that needs to be submitted to me on a MS Word document file. I'm looking forward to seeing those. Everyone, I wish you a good week. Take care. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me. And we'll take it from there.